I always thought my parents would have my back, especially when it came to something as important as my inheritance. But when I found out they gave it all to my ex instead, I couldn't believe it. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I uncovered a secret that changed everything about my past and my future. It was a typical Sunday morning when the news hit me like a punch to the gut. I had just returned from my weekend shift at the law firm, tired and worn out, looking forward to a quiet evening with a book and some takeout. But when I stepped into my apartment, I found my mother's voice on my voicemail, the one I had been avoiding for days. "Darling, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to let you know that we've decided to transfer your inheritance to Caleb. You know, since he's had a hard time since the divorce. I'm sure you understand." I stared at the message, unable to move, unable to breathe. My inheritance, transferred to Caleb. I hadn't even thought about it in months. The idea of my parents' wealth and what I would inherit had been pushed to the back of my mind, buried beneath years of emotional turmoil and unresolved issues. Caleb, my ex-husband, the man who had betrayed me in the most public way imaginable. He had lost our home in a game of reckless investments and poor decisions. And now, my parents were giving him my inheritance. The very inheritance they'd promised would be mine once they were gone. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. The betrayal felt too personal, too public. I pressed the replay button again, hoping I had misheard, that I hadn't caught the words that echoed in my head. "Caleb needs it more than you. We know you've always been more independent, sweetie. You'll be fine without it. More independent. Sweetie." The same words they used when they told me my achievements were never enough. When I graduated from law school with honors, they'd merely nodded and told me they were proud. When Caleb dropped out of university to find himself, they'd thrown him a farewell party. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. My parents had always chosen Caleb. They had always treated him like the golden child, never questioning his decisions, never once holding him accountable for his mistakes. And now they were making a choice that would change everything. I stood there in the middle of my living room, frozen, the weight of the message sinking in. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that they had given my inheritance to Caleb, or the fact that they hadn't even considered telling me in person. They hadn't even thought I'd deserve an explanation. They had simply made the decision, without consulting me, without even trying to understand how I might feel. "How could they?" I whispered aloud, the words thick with the sting of disappointment. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend Rachel, unable to shake the anger and disbelief that gripped me. "Rachel, hey, I need to talk to you. Something just happened and I don't know what to do." Her reply came almost instantly. "Rachel, what's going on?" I didn't have the words for the magnitude of what I was feeling. My hands trembled as I typed, the screen blurring in front of my eyes. Me. My parents just gave Caleb my inheritance. They didn't even tell me until I found out through a voicemail. Rachel's reply was immediate, her support unwavering. "Rachel, what? That's insane. Have you talked to them?" I stared at her message, the answer obvious. How could I? How could I talk to the people who had always taken Caleb's side, who had never once recognized the effort I'd put into everything I did? I could feel the anger building, hot and fast, but I didn't know how to channel it, didn't know where to go from here. Just as I was about to type a response, a message from my mother buzzed through. "Mom, sweetheart, I hope you understand. Caleb needs it more right now. He's been struggling ever since the divorce. You'll always be fine. We know how strong you are. Love, Mom." I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal in her words, or the fact that they truly believed I would be okay with their decision. Strong, independent. That was all they ever saw me as. That was all I had ever been to them, someone who could handle it all, who didn't need their help. And Caleb? He was the one who needed saving. I sank onto the couch, my phone slipping from my hand as the reality of the situation settled over me. My ex, my inheritance, my parents, none of it felt real. It was as if my whole life had been built on a foundation of lies and favoritism. I had worked so hard to prove myself, to be the person they could be proud of, but nothing would ever be enough. They had made it clear that Caleb's mistakes were theirs to fix, and my successes were mine to navigate alone. And then, in that moment, A single thought crossed my mind. What else had they been hiding from me? The question gnawed at me as I sat in the silence of my apartment. I wasn't sure if I was angry, sad, or just plain lost. But I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day felt like a blur. I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and scenarios. I had to talk to them. I had to face them. But as the clock ticked closer to dinner time, the nerves gnawed at me. I hadn't seen my parents since the voicemail, and I couldn't fathom what I would say. The betrayal felt too raw, too personal. The longer I waited, the harder it seemed to summon the courage to confront them. I arrived at their house in the early evening, my hands clutching the wheel of the car so tightly my knuckles were white. The suburban house looked the same as always, pristine, with its white columns and manicured lawn. A home of perfection in every way but one. The place that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a battlefield. I rang the doorbell, trying to steady my breath, but the moment my mother opened the door, her bright smile faltered when she saw my face. "Sweetheart, I'm so glad you came," she said warmly, but there was a hint of unease in her voice. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stepped inside and followed her down the hallway. My father was in the kitchen, humming, as he prepared what I assumed was another one of his elaborate dinners. He didn't look up as I entered, and for a moment I stood there, watching him chop vegetables, my stomach twisting tighter. "Hi, Dad," I finally said, my voice unexpectedly small. "Ah, Emma, there you are?" He turned around, offering me his usual calm smile. It felt like a mask. "We're so glad you could make it. Dinner's almost ready. I hope you've had a good day." I nodded but didn't speak. The polite pleasantries felt hollow, like a bad joke. How could we go back to this, back to the small talk, when the foundation of everything was suddenly cracked wide open? "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice tight as the words left my mouth. I hated how vulnerable I sounded, how shaken I felt, but there was no denying the rawness of my emotions. My parents exchanged quick glances, and I saw it. Those fleeting expressions of guilt before they masked them behind their usual calm. I could feel the tension rising, but I pressed on. "I found out about Caleb," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. "The inheritance. You gave it to him." My mother froze, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. My father set down the knife he had been holding, his eyes momentarily wide, before he forced a smile. "Sweetheart, we can explain," my father said, his tone soft but defensive. I shook my head, unable to mask the anger that surged within me. "Explain? How do you explain that? You gave him my inheritance, my money, the money that was supposed to help me after everything I've been through. But instead, you gave it to him, the one person who doesn't deserve it at all." I could see the gears turning in their heads, the mental calculations, the justifications they would try to pull out of their sleeves. But I wasn't having it, not now. "Emma, it's not what you think," my mother began, her voice wavering slightly. "Caleb's been struggling. Ever since the divorce, he's been, well, lost. He doesn't have anyone to rely on. You've always been so independent, honey. We knew you could handle things." "That's not the point," I shot back. "It's not about what I can handle. It's about fairness. You didn't even ask me. You didn't even consider how I would feel. It's like none of the hard work I've done matters. You gave him my future, while I've spent years proving myself to you. And you just handed it to him like he's the one who deserves it more." My mother's face twisted in discomfort. "That's not what we meant, Emma. We've always supported you, but Caleb needs more help. We thought he might need it for his recovery after the divorce. He's been through so much. And we just wanted to make sure he had a stable future." I scoffed. "Recovery? You mean after he ruined everything? After he drained our savings and left me picking up the pieces? What about me, Mom? What about the way you've overlooked everything I've done? The way you've only ever supported Caleb and ignored me?" My father cleared his throat, trying to shift the conversation. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Emma. This isn't about playing favorites. We just felt Caleb needed this. He's been so lost, and we didn't know what else to do." I could hear the excuses in their voices, the cracks in their defenses. But it didn't matter. The words had already been said, the damage done. "I've always had to fend for myself, haven't I?" I said. the bitterness creeping into my voice. All these years, while you attended his therapy sessions and praised him for trying, you never once took the time to see what I needed. You never once gave me the same kind of care. The room was thick with silence. My parents stood there, unable to respond, their gazes shifting between each other as if trying to piece together a response that would make sense. But it was too late. The truth had already broken through their carefully constructed facade. I turned to leave, my mind spinning with everything I had just heard. But before I could reach the door, my father's voice stopped me. "Emma, wait," he said, his voice softer now. We just wanted to help Caleb." "You don't understand." "Help him?" I interrupted, spinning around to face them. "Help him destroy his life? Help him keep running away from his responsibilities? You've always bailed him out, and now you're bailing him out again, at my expense." My heart raced in my chest, and for a moment I felt like I might break into 1,000 pieces. How had I let myself fall into this pattern? How had I allowed them to keep treating me like I didn't matter? "Maybe you need to help yourselves first," I muttered, barely able to keep my emotions from spilling over. "Because this isn't just about Caleb. It's about the way you've treated me my entire life." With that, I turned and left. I didn't look back. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. My parents had tried to call me multiple times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I couldn't face them, not after what had happened. I stayed holed up in my apartment, replaying the conversation over and over in my head, unable to reconcile the parents I had once trusted with the ones who had just shattered my world. But it was during one of those sleepless nights that I found something. I was going through some old family documents in a drawer, trying to organize the mess that had accumulated over the years. Papers from my parents' estate planning, wills, old photos, and forgotten letters cluttered the space. As I was sifting through a folder, something caught my eye. A thick manila envelope, marked with the words "Confidential." Curious, I opened it. Inside, I found a stack of documents, legal papers, investment summaries, and a letter that seemed far too official for casual reading. My eyes narrowed as I scanned the pages. It didn't take long for me to realize what this was. This was their trust fund. The trust fund. The one my parents had never once mentioned to me. The one they had always claimed didn't exist. The one they had used as a reason to dismiss my financial struggles, while simultaneously offering Caleb support at every turn. I stared at the documents, my breath catching in my throat. The fund was far larger than I had ever imagined. Millions, hidden away for future emergencies. But as I read further, the details made my blood run cold. The trust fund was not just for emergencies. It was a secret pot of money, one that had been set up long before my birth. My stomach churned as I read through the pages. The trust was designed to ensure my parents' wealth was passed down to Caleb and me, but with specific conditions. The funds were supposed to be used for our future, our families, and our personal growth. But hidden within the fine print was something I didn't expect. Caleb was the sole beneficiary of the majority of the trust, with my share being far smaller and contingent upon meeting certain conditions. The wording was vague, almost as if they had purposefully structured it this way to ensure Caleb would always have more, always be in need of more help. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The trust wasn't just a safety net. It was a trap designed to keep me in a cycle of working hard and proving myself, while Caleb was given free rein to squander everything and still come out on top. The more I read, the more the truth became clear. My parents hadn't just chosen Caleb over me. They had structured their entire financial plan around keeping him in control of the narrative, of the money, of everything. They had created a system that gave him the advantage from the very start. I dropped the papers onto the coffee table and ran my hands through my hair, trying to calm myself. This was bigger than I had imagined. I had always known my parents had a financial cushion, but I had never guessed it was this massive. I had never guessed that the trust was so carefully constructed, with Caleb as the preferred beneficiary, always positioned to succeed regardless of his choices, while I was left to scrape by on my own merit. The realization hit me hard. The inheritance they gave to Caleb, that wasn't just a random decision. It was part of a pattern, a strategy they had been following for years. It wasn't about him needing help. It was about them maintaining control. I stared at the papers, a feeling of betrayal so sharp it hurt deep in my chest. My entire life, my achievements, my struggles, they had been nothing more than a footnote to my parents' grand plan, a plan that had always favored Caleb and never once taken me into account. That was when I realized something even more chilling. My parents had never truly believed in me. They had always seen me as the strong, independent one who didn't need anything from them, while Caleb, flawed, reckless Caleb, was their golden child, the one they kept saving, the one they kept supporting. But now, with the trust fund uncovered, I saw their game in full view. This wasn't about helping Caleb. This was about keeping him tethered to their wealth and control. And I was left with nothing but scraps. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the documents. The anger swelled inside me, threatening to overtake every rational thought I had left. But there was something else too, something far more dangerous than the anger. It was the feeling of being completely powerless. I had spent years trying to gain their approval, trying to prove I was worthy of their love and support. But all along, I had been playing into a system they had rigged from the start. But now I had the truth. And that truth would change everything. The days that followed were a blur of anger, disbelief, and exhaustion. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't shake the image of those trust fund documents from my mind. The truth was too raw, too fresh. And every time I replayed my parents' words in my head, it felt like a second betrayal, each one deeper than the last. I tried to reach out to Rachel, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her everything. I felt ashamed, as if I was betraying some unspoken agreement between my family and me. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about my whole life being overshadowed by a system I had never even known existed. I knew I needed to confront them, but something held me back. Maybe it was the hope that if I stayed silent long enough, the truth might just disappear. Or maybe it was the crushing realization that if I confronted them, there was no going back. I couldn't unknow what I had learned. Once I called them out on the trust fund, there would be no pretending it didn't exist. But the anger continued to simmer beneath the surface, and as much as I tried to avoid it, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something needed to change. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. I texted my parents, telling them we needed to talk. The message was simple, but I knew it would get their attention. Within the hour, they replied. It was set, dinner at their house again, the place where every big conversation happened. Every emotional confrontation unfolded. I showed up later that evening, my nerves on edge. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. This time, I was going to make them understand. When I arrived, my mother greeted me with the same forced smile, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She knew this conversation was inevitable. My father didn't even meet my gaze as he continued to chop vegetables, pretending everything was normal, pretending everything was fine. It was as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just uncovered their biggest secret. Let's talk, I said flatly, cutting through the silence like a knife. I didn't have time for pleasantries anymore. My mother's face fell, and she gestured toward the dining room table. Of course, sweetheart. Sit down, please. We'll talk about everything. I could feel the weight of their guilt in the air, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for them to just feel bad. I wanted them to understand. I wanted them to see what they had done. I sat down, my hands shaking as I placed them flat on the table. I know about the trust fund, I said, my voice steady but sharp. There was no need to sugarcoat it. There was no way around it anymore. I had seen the papers. I had seen the way they had manipulated the situation for years. For a moment, neither of them spoke. My father's knife scraped against the cutting board with an unnerving rhythm. Finally, my mother sighed, her eyes meeting mine. Emma, it's not what you think. I didn't let her finish. No, it's exactly what I think. You've been keeping secrets from me, controlling everything, deciding my future for me while I've been out here, working my ass off just to be seen. You've always chosen Caleb, and now you've given him my inheritance. You gave him the money that was supposed to help me, that was supposed to give me a chance. But instead, you handed it over to him without a second thought. You handed him everything, while I'm left to pick up the pieces. My father put the knife down slowly. and my mother took a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself. "It's not that simple, Emma," my father said, his voice more tired than defensive. "We didn't give Caleb your inheritance to hurt you. He needed it more. No," I cut in. "Don't say that. Don't act like you gave it to him out of some misguided sense of compassion. You gave him my future because it's easier for you to fix him than to face the fact that you've neglected me my whole life. You think I'm strong. You think I don't need your help, so you gave him the money instead." "Emma, you're being unfair," my mother said softly. Her voice wavered, but she didn't seem angry, she seemed regretful. "We've always believed in you. We thought you didn't need anything from us. You've always been so independent. We thought Caleb needed the money more. And you never stopped to think about what I needed, did you?" I said bitterly. "You thought I didn't need anything, but that's not true. I needed you. I needed your support, your belief in me. And yet, every time Caleb messed up, every time he made a bad decision, you were right there to pick up the pieces for him. But I was never enough. I was always the one you believed could handle it on my own." The silence between us grew thick. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air, but neither of my parents responded immediately. They both looked down, as if trying to find the right words. But there was no right word. Not anymore. "I didn't even know about the trust fund," I whispered, my voice quiet but cutting. "I didn't know I was the backup. I didn't know my share of the money was so small. You never told me. You never even thought I deserved to know." My father looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite decipher. "We never meant to hurt you, Emma. We just wanted to protect Caleb." "By enabling him?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. "By making sure he'd never have to face the consequences of his actions? You protected him while leaving me to fend for myself." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. "We were wrong," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I see that now. I don't know what we were thinking. We thought we were doing the right thing." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You were doing the right thing for Caleb, but not for me." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't pretend that everything's okay when it's not." I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, any more justifications. I had already heard enough. I left their house without another word, feeling the cold air hit me as I stepped outside. I felt empty. I felt like I had just lost the last bit of hope I had left for a family that had never truly seen me. The next few days felt like a blur. I'd tried to focus on work, but the events from my parents' house kept replaying in my head. The conversation was raw and real, but it didn't feel like enough. I still couldn't shake the feeling that there were more things left unsaid, more truths I had yet to uncover. My parents had been trying to reach me, calling constantly, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't have the emotional energy to deal with their apologies or justifications anymore. I needed time to think, to process what I had learned and what it meant for my future. The inheritance, the trust fund, the way they had treated me. Everything had changed in a matter of days, and I wasn't sure what to do with all of it. But then, late one evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Mom, can we talk? In person? Please, Emma, we need to fix this." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I didn't know if I was ready to face them again. I didn't know if I was ready to hear what they had to say, but the message felt urgent, like they were finally willing to confront the truth. Me, okay, tomorrow, same place. The next afternoon, I arrived at my parents' house again, but this time, I wasn't angry, I was exhausted. I walked through the door, and immediately, I could feel the difference. My parents weren't their usual selves. They weren't trying to put on a facade of normalcy. They were waiting for me, and I could see it in their eyes. They knew what this was. This wasn't going to be another round of their excuses. It was time for the truth. "Sit down, Emma," my father said, gesturing to the couch. His voice was low, almost tentative. "We've been thinking about everything we've done, and we're ready to talk." I sat down, unsure of what would come next, but knowing this conversation had to happen. My mother sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly together. The air between us felt heavy, thick with the weight of the past few days. "I owe you an apology," my father said first, his voice rough. "For everything, for how we've treated you. We didn't see what we were doing, and that was wrong." "I never meant to hurt you, Emma," my mother added quietly. "But I see now that we did. We made mistakes. We favored Caleb, and we didn't even realize it until it was too late." I looked at them, searching their faces for the sincerity I desperately needed to see. For the first time, they were admitting the truth. But was it too little? Too late? "I don't know if I can just forget everything," I said softly. "You didn't just give Caleb my inheritance. You've treated me like I didn't matter for years. And the worst part is, I let you. I let you make me feel like I wasn't enough, that I had to work harder, do more, to get your approval. While Caleb, he just got everything handed to him." "We were wrong," my father said, his voice firm but full of regret. "We've always treated you like you didn't need us. But we were wrong to think that way. You needed us, Emma, and we let you down. You deserved better. You deserved to be seen for everything you've done. You deserved the same support we gave Caleb." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I refused to let it overtake me. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had learned over the years that my worth wasn't defined by their approval, but hearing them finally admit their faults was a small victory. "I know we can't undo the past," my mother said, her voice shaking, "but we want to make it right. We want to make amends for what we've done." I didn't know what I wanted from them anymore. I didn't know if an apology would ever be enough to erase the years of pain. But I did know one thing: I had to find my own way forward, without them. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I said quietly, "but I'm going to figure out my future, without any of you holding me back." The next few weeks were a blur. After the conversation with my parents, I took some time away from everything. I needed to figure out what I was going to do. I couldn't stay in this suffocating cycle of dependence and manipulation any longer. The trust fund had been the final straw. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about how they had never truly seen me, never truly believed in me, not in the way I needed them to. I booked a flight to a nearby city for a fresh start. I didn't know what my future looked like yet, but I knew it was time for me to step away from the past. Time to live my life on my terms. The morning I left, I took a final look at my parents' house as I drove away. The memories of the good times, of when I was younger and everything felt easy, washed over me. But the weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the manipulation, hung in the air like a cloud I couldn't shake off. As I left my old life behind, I made a vow to myself. I would never let anyone, not even my parents, make me feel small again. I would build my own future, one that was mine and mine alone. The first few months after leaving were difficult. Starting over is never easy, especially when you've been in a place where you were always overlooked, always made to feel like you weren't enough. But slowly, I began to find my footing. I landed a new job, one that challenged me in ways I never thought possible. I surrounded myself with people who saw me for who I truly was, someone worthy of success and love, someone who didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. And then one day, I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Emma, I know you've been through a lot, and I can't change the past," she said, her voice soft. "But I wanted to let you know that we've made some changes. The trust fund. It's being divided more equally now. We want you to have what you deserve." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her that it was too late, that no amount of money would undo the years of hurt. But another part of me, a quieter part, understood that this was her way of trying to make things right. It wasn't about the money, it was about finally acknowledging what she had never been able to see before: my worth. "I appreciate it," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm doing okay. I'm figuring it out, on my own." As I hung up the phone, I realized something. I didn't need their money, I didn't need their approval. I had built something for myself, something that was real and mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It's strange, really, the way things turn out, how the pieces of your life come together when you least expect it. But in the end, I realized that everything I had gone through, every hardship, every feeling of being overlooked, had shaped me into someone stronger, someone who could stand on her own. I didn't need the inheritance. I didn't need the trust fund. I didn't even need my parents' approval. What I had was my own strength. And that was enough.